Think about this for a second. There was a time when your car could wink at you. When the steering wheel had a horn ring, you could slap from any angle. When the dashboard glowed a soft red instead of blinding you with a tablet-sized screen. And if you wanted fresh air, you just cranked open a tiny little triangle window and let the breeze hit your face. These were not luxury features, they were just cars. But somewhere along the way, in the name of safety, efficiency, and touchscreens, we let go of the things that gave our cars actual personality. Today, we are counting down 25 car features that faded into history, and honestly, we loved every single one of them. Hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already, and let us take a ride through automotive nostalgia. Number 25. Curb feelers. If you have never seen these, picture this. Thin metal rods, almost like whiskers, sticking out from the lower body panels of a car right above the tires. That is what curb feelers were. And they had one beautifully simple job. When you got too close to a curb while parallel parking, they would scrape against the concrete and make a sound, warning you before your hubcaps took the hit. They were popular from the 1950s through the 1970s, especially with drivers who took serious pride in their chrome wheels. No sensors, no cameras, no beeping, just a thin strip of spring steel doing the work of a 21st century parking assist system. And the thing is, they actually worked. The sound was unmistakable, a metallic scraping that told you to back off. Eventually, as cars got lower and parking technology caught up, curb feelers quietly disappeared. But there is something charmingly low-tech about a car that could feel its way to the curb. Number 24. Headlight wipers. Yes, this was a real thing. Tiny little windshield wipers mounted directly on the headlights. They looked ridiculous. They were adorable. And they were supposed to keep your headlights clean during rain, snow, and road grime. Mostly found on European cars from the 1970s through the 1990s, particularly Volvos, Saabs, and Mercedes, these miniature wipers would activate alongside the main windshield wipers. The problem was, they were fragile. The little motors burned out, the tiny arms snapped off, and replacing them was oddly expensive for something so small. Eventually, automakers switched to high-pressure washer jets that squirted fluid onto the lens. But nothing matched the sheer visual comedy of watching tiny wipers frantically cleaning your headlights in a rainstorm. Delightfully unnecessary and deeply missed. Number 23. Cigarette lighters and ashtrays. There was a time when every car, regardless of price, came standard with a cigarette lighter and at least one ashtray. We are talking about the 1950s all the way through the 1990s. That little cylindrical plug that glowed orange when you pushed it in and waited a few seconds, then pulled it out with a coil hot enough to light your smoke. Ashtrays were built into the dashboard, the rear armrest, sometimes even the door panels. They were everywhere. And here is the strange part. Even people who did not smoke found uses for them. The lighter socket became the 12-volt power outlet we used for phone chargers. The ashtrays became storage for coins and receipts. As smoking fell out of favor, automakers quietly deleted them. By the early 2000s, most cars came without either. Now that little socket charges your devices, and nobody remembers it, once lit cigarettes. Number 22. White wall tires. Nothing screamed elegance quite like a set of white wall tires. That bright white strip running around the sidewall turned any car into a rolling piece of art. They first appeared in the early 1900s as a byproduct of the rubber manufacturing process, where natural white rubber was left exposed on the outer wall. By the 1950s, they were practically mandatory on any respectable car. Cadillacs, Lincolns, Buicks, you name it. They were the jewelry of the tire world. But white walls were high maintenance. They yellowed, they scuffed, and keeping them clean was a part-time job. As performance tires evolved with darker, more durable rubber compounds and wider tread designs, The white wall shrank from a wide band to a thin stripe, and then vanished entirely. Today you will only spot them on restored classics at car shows, but for decades they were the finishing touch that told the world you cared about how your car looked from the ground up. Number 21. Vinyl landau roofs. This one might divide the room, but hear me out. Vinyl roofs were everywhere from the 1960s through the early 1990s. The idea was simple. Take a hardtop car and cover part or all of the roof in textured vinyl to make it look like a convertible, even though it was not. It was called a landau roof, named after the German city of Landau, where coach builders first designed folding carriage tops. At their peak, you could get a vinyl roof on everything from a Cadillac Fleetwood to a Dodge Challenger. Some even came with fake landau bars, those decorative S-shaped chrome hinges on the rear pillar, purely cosmetic. The 1996 Cadillac Fleetwood and Buick Roadmaster were among the very last cars to offer a factory landau roof. They faded because vinyl trapped moisture, caused rust underneath, and honestly, tastes just changed. But in their heyday, a vinyl roof was the automotive equivalent of a velvet jacket. Flashy, a little impractical, and undeniably cool. Number 20. 8-track tape players. Before cassettes, before CDs, before streaming, there was the 8-track. These clunky plastic cartridges were the first real way to choose your own music in the car. They hit the automotive scene in the mid-1960s when Ford offered them as factory options, and by the early 1970s, they were everywhere. The thing about 8-tracks was that they never stopped playing. The tape was a continuous loop, which meant no rewinding and no fast-forwarding. The album was split into 4 programs, and the player would switch between them with a loud mechanical clunk, sometimes right in the middle of a song. It was gloriously imperfect. The sound quality was decent for the era, but the tapes had a habit of getting eaten by the player, leaving you with a tangled mess of magnetic ribbon. Cassette players killed the 8-track by the late 1970s. But for a brief window, sliding that fat cartridge into the dash was the coolest thing you could do behind the wheel. Number 19. Floor-mounted dimmer switch. Here is one that most people under 40 have never even heard of. From roughly the 1940s through the 1970s, the switch to toggle between your low beams and high beams was not on the steering column. It was on the floor. A small round button, usually located to the left of the brake pedal, that you stomped on with your foot. One press for high beams, another press for low. Drivers developed muscle memory for it, and many swore it was actually better than the current system because you never had to take your hands off the wheel. It freed up space on the dashboard and steering column, and it worked with a satisfying mechanical click. The switch migrated to the steering column stalk as cars became more complex and manufacturers consolidated controls. But ask anyone who grew up driving with a floor dimmer, and they will tell you it was the superior system. Simple, intuitive, and strangely satisfying to stomp. Number 18. Manual crank windows. There is an entire generation that has no idea what it means to roll down a window, not press a button. Actually roll. Manual crank windows were standard equipment on virtually every car for decades. A small handle on the door panel connected to a regulator mechanism that physically raised and lowered the glass. It was exercise, air conditioning, and entertainment all in one. Kids in the back seat would race each other to see who could crank theirs down first. And the beauty was their simplicity. They almost never broke. No motors to burn out, no wiring to short-circuit. When power windows became standard in the 1980s and 1990s, the humble crank handle was the first casualty. By the 2000s, finding a new car with manual windows was like finding a payphone. We traded reliability for convenience, and the window crank quietly cranked its last. Number 17. Motorized power antennas. You would start the car, turn on the radio, and then it would happen. A thin metal antenna would rise dramatically from the fender, telescoping upward like a robot finger reaching for a signal. Motorized power antennas were a fixture on cars from the 1970s through the early 2000s, and they were deeply satisfying. There was something theatrical about watching the antenna extend when you turned on the radio and retract when you shut it off. Some were fixed masts that you manually extended, but the motorized ones were the showstoppers. The problem was reliability. The motors wore out, the mast got stuck halfway up, and replacing the whole assembly meant pulling apart the fender. Eventually, automakers switched to stubby fixed antennas, then shark fins, and now many cars have antennas embedded in the glass. Functional, yes, but absolutely zero showmanship. Number 16. Rear-facing third-row seats. If you grew up in the 1970s or 90s, and it was incredible, kids fought over those seats. They made road trips an event. You could make faces at the drivers behind you, hold up signs, play games. When safety regulations caught up and SUVs replaced station wagons, the rear-facing seat vanished. Forward-facing third rows took over, and while they are objectively safer, they are nowhere near as fun. Number 15. Built-in car phones. In the 1980s, having a phone in your car meant one thing: you had arrived. Built-in car phones were the ultimate status symbol, hardwired into the vehicle with a large transceiver unit usually mounted in the trunk and a handset cradled somewhere near the center console. They cost a fortune, both to install and to operate, and the cellular networks they relied on were spotty at best. But none of that mattered. If you had a car phone, you were important. Business executives, doctors, and anyone who wanted to project success had one. The technology was bulky and primitive compared to what came next. By the mid-1990s, handheld cell phones had become small enough and affordable enough to make the built-in car phone completely obsolete overnight. Within a few years, they went from status symbol to relic. Today our cars have Bluetooth, Apple CarPlay, and voice assistants. But nothing will ever match the sheer power move of picking up a car phone handset in traffic. Number 14. Full-size spare tires. This one still hurts. There was a time when every car came with a full-size spare tire in the trunk. Not a donut, not a can of foam sealant. An actual matching tire, the same size as the four on the ground. If you got a flat, you swapped it out and kept driving at full speed without worrying about handling or speed restrictions. It gave drivers genuine peace of mind, especially on long road trips through remote areas. But as cars got smaller and fuel efficiency became king, the full-size spare was the first thing to go. Automakers replaced them with compact temporary spares, then tire repair kits, and some modern cars come with nothing at all. The weight savings and trunk space gained were apparently more important than the security of a proper spare. You can still find them in some trucks and SUVs with off-road packages, but for most passenger cars, the full-size spare is gone, and the first time you are stuck on a dark highway with a can of foam, you will miss it. Number 13. Column shifters. Before the floor-mounted gear selector became standard, many American cars put the shifter right on the steering column. Column shifters, sometimes affectionately called 3 on the tree for manual versions, were a staple of sedans and trucks from the 1940s through the 1980s. The design freed up the entire front floor area, which worked beautifully with bench seats to create an uninterrupted space across the front of the cabin. 3 passengers could sit up front comfortably without a gear lever poking anyone in the knee. The column shifter was intuitive once you got used to it, and for trucks it made perfect sense since it kept the floor clear for work gear. As bucket seats replaced bench seats and sporty floor consoles became fashionable, the column shifter migrated downward and eventually became electronic. Some trucks held on to column shifters well into the 2000s, but even they have largely switched to buttons, dials, or console-mounted levers. The column shifter was practical, space-saving, and oddly elegant. Number 12. Hood ornaments. There was an era when the front of a car was its face, and the hood ornament was its crown. From the flying goddess on a Rolls-Royce to the leaping Jaguar on, well, a Jaguar. These small sculptures served as symbols of brand identity, luxury, and pride. They started as decorative radiator caps in the early 1900s and evolved into some of the most recognizable symbols in automotive history. The Spirit of Ecstasy, the Mercedes three-pointed star, the Pontiac Arrowhead. Each one told you exactly what you were looking at from a block away. But safety regulations in the 1970s began phasing them out because protruding ornaments posed a serious risk to pedestrians. Then came the theft problem. In the late 1980s, stealing hood ornaments became a fashion trend, leading some brands to develop retractable versions. Today, most badges are flush-mounted on the grille, functional, safe, and completely lacking in personality. Number 11. Chrome bumpers. Chrome bumpers were not just functional. They were statements. Big, shiny, and unapologetically heavy, they defined the look of American cars from the 1930s through the early 1970s. These substantial steel bumpers, plated in gleaming chrome, gave cars a distinct, muscular face. They could take a parking lot tap without flinching, and a good polish made them look like mirrors. Beyond protection, chrome bumpers were art. Designers sculpted them with curves, bullet shapes, and intricate details that gave each model its own identity. But in 1973, new federal safety standards required bumpers to withstand 5-mile-per-hour impacts without damage. Chrome could not meet these requirements economically, so manufacturers switched to energy-absorbing bumpers covered in rubber or plastic, safer but far less attractive. By the 1980s, chrome bumpers were practically extinct on new cars. The automotive industry has essentially declared chrome dead in modern design. Number 10. Analog instrument clusters. There is something deeply satisfying about watching a physical needle sweep across a numbered dial. Analog instrument clusters, with their individual gauges for speed, RPM, fuel level, and temperature, were the standard dashboard setup for nearly a century of automobile production. Each gauge had its own character, the speedometer needle climbing as you accelerated, the tachometer dancing through the rev range, the temperature gauge sitting perfectly in the middle where you wanted it to stay. These gauges communicated essential information at a glance without menus, screens, or software updates. But digital displays offered something analog could not: customization. Manufacturers could pack more information into less space, change layouts on the fly, and integrate navigation and media controls. By the 2010s, digital instrument clusters were taking over, and today most new cars have fully digital screens behind the steering wheel. They are impressive, no question, but they lack the soul of a set of proper gauges. When that analog speedometer needle climbed, you felt the speed. A number on a screen just does not hit the same way. Number 9. Front bench seats. In the golden age of American motoring, the front seat of a car was not two separate chairs. It was a couch. Front bench seats stretched the full width of the cabin, creating a seamless surface that could seat 3 people across. They made cars feel spacious, inviting, and versatile. And for anyone who went on a date to the drive-in, the bench seat was essential. No console in the way, no gear lever to navigate, just one wide seat that let your sweetheart slide right over next to you. They earned the nickname sweetheart seats for that reason. But airbags changed everything. Engineers could not deploy a center airbag effectively, and bucket seats provided better support and crash protection for each passenger. By the 2000s, front bench seats had vanished from passenger cars, hanging on only in some full-size trucks. We got safety and ergonomics. We lost the coziest front seat in automotive history. Number 8. Vent windows. Before air conditioning became standard, car designers had an elegant solution for keeping cool behind the wheel. Vent windows, also called wing windows, were small triangular panes set into the front doors, just ahead of the main window. You could crank or push them open to scoop air directly onto the driver or passenger, creating a focused breeze even when the other windows were closed. They were standard on most cars from the 1930s through the late 1970s, and they worked surprisingly well. The directed airflow was more effective than simply dropping the main window, which mostly just created turbulence and noise. Vent windows also served as a convenient entry point for anyone who locked their keys in the car, though we probably should not mention that part too loudly. As automotive air conditioning became affordable and widespread during the 1970s and 1980s, the little triangle windows lost their purpose. Designers sealed them up to improve aerodynamics and reduce manufacturing costs. But on a warm evening, nothing beat that focused rush of air from an open wing window. Number 7. Physical climate control, knobs and buttons. There is a growing rebellion happening in the car world right now, and it is all about buttons. Physical climate control knobs, those chunky rotary dials and tactile buttons that let you adjust your temperature, fan speed, and airflow direction without looking, are disappearing faster than anyone expected. For decades, reaching over and twisting a dial was second nature. You knew exactly where the controls were, and you could make adjustments by feel alone while keeping your eyes on the road. It was safe, intuitive, and instant. Then, touchscreens took over. Manufacturers started burying climate controls inside digital menus, requiring multiple taps and swipes to change the temperature by a single degree. It looked sleek and modern, but functionally, it was a massive step backward. Even major automotive reviewers and safety organizations have criticized the shift, noting that touchscreens increase driver distraction. Some brands are actually bringing physical controls back after consumer backlash, but the damage is done for most new models. Sometimes the old way really is the better way. Number 6. Tail fins. If there was ever a car feature that captured the pure, unbridled optimism of an era, it was the tail fin. Born in the late 1940s and reaching absurd heights by the late 1950s, tail fins turned ordinary automobiles into land-bound rockets. The trend started at Cadillac in 1948, inspired by the twin tail booms of the Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighter plane. Designer Harley Earl saw the aircraft and thought, yes, that belongs on a car, and apparently so did everyone else. By 1959, the Cadillac Eldorado had tail fins so tall they could practically slice bread. Chrysler, Plymouth, Dodge, Buick, everybody wanted in. The fins served absolutely no aerodynamic purpose at street speeds. They were pure style, pure confidence, pure post-war American exuberance. But like all things excessive, the trend burned bright and fast. By the early 1960s, cleaner designs took over, and the tail fin retreated into history. They remained some of the most celebrated design elements ever put on an automobile. Number 5. Keyed ignitions. For over a century, starting a car meant one thing. You took a metal key, inserted it into the ignition cylinder, and turned it. That twist of the wrist was a ritual, a moment of anticipation before the engine rumbled to life. The weight of the key in your hand, the resistance of the cylinder, the satisfying click as it turned through each position. It was mechanical and tactile and real. Keys also served as physical security. No key, no driving. Then came proximity key fobs and push-button start systems. By the 2010s, most new cars had eliminated the traditional keyed ignition entirely. You walked up with the fob in your pocket, pressed a button, and drove away. Convenient, absolutely. But something was lost. The ceremony of starting a car was replaced by pressing a button, the same motion you use to turn on a microwave. Practical, yes. But the soul of the experience, gone. Number 4. Manual handbrakes. The pull-up handbrake was one of the most satisfying mechanical interactions in all of driving. That lever between the seats, usually wrapped in leather or rubber, connected by a cable directly to the rear brakes. You pulled it up with a firm tug, heard the ratcheting clicks, and knew your car was not going anywhere. It was mechanical confidence. For performance drivers, it was also a tool. Handbrake turns, rally-style slides, emergency maneuvers. The manual handbrake gave you direct, immediate control over the rear wheels. It was simple, reliable, and virtually maintenance-free. But electronic parking brakes changed everything. A small button or switch replaced the lever, engaging the brakes automatically through electric motors. They self-adjust, they activate automatically when you park, and they take up almost no space. They also made hill start assist possible. All very sensible improvements. But pulling up that handbrake lever was one of the last purely mechanical connections between driver and machine. Now it is just another button, functional, forgettable, and utterly without drama. Number 3. T-tops. If you wanted the wind-in-your-hair experience but were not quite ready for a full convertible, T-tops were the answer. 2 removable roof panels, one on each side of a central bar, gave you open-air driving without sacrificing structural rigidity. They were the definitive feature of American sports cars in the 1970s and 1980s. The black and gold Pontiac Trans Am from Smokey and the Bandit made T-tops a cultural icon practically overnight. Soon, GM offered them on Camaros, Firebirds, and Corvettes. Ford put them on Mustangs and Thunderbirds. Japanese manufacturers jumped in with the Datsun Z cars and the Toyota Supra. When the panels were in place, many were tinted glass, giving you a panoramic view of the sky. The problems were real, though. T-tops leaked water notoriously, the panels were fragile, and they weakened structural integrity. The last mainstream T-tops disappeared with the 4th-generation Camaro and Firebird in 2002. Panoramic sunroofs replaced them, but never captured the same rebellious spirit. Number 2. Cassette and CD players. Think about this. There was an entire era of driving defined by the act of physically choosing your music. Sliding a cassette into the dash, hearing that satisfying click, then the soft hiss before the first track started. Making mixtapes was an art form. You would sit by the radio with your finger on the record button or carefully dub songs from one tape to another, timing the gaps perfectly. The cassette player was personal in a way that streaming simply is not. Then CDs arrived in the 1980s and changed the game. Superior sound quality, no rewinding, and the ability to skip to your favorite track. People built entire collections of car-specific CD wallets. Some luxury cars had 6 disc changers mounted in the trunk. But digital music, Bluetooth, and streaming made physical media obsolete almost overnight. Most new cars no longer have a CD slot. The convenience of millions of songs at your voice command is undeniable. But there was a romance to flipping through a case of CDs at a red light that no algorithm can replicate. Number 1. Pop-up headlights. And here it is, the single most beloved car feature to ever fade into history. Pop-up headlights. There is simply nothing else like them. When those headlights flipped open, the car came alive. It went from sleek and mysterious to wide-eyed and ready for anything. The feature first appeared on the 1936 Cord 810, where the headlights were raised by hand cranks. But it was the 1980s that turned pop-up headlights into an automotive religion. They were everywhere. Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Porsches, Mazdas, Toyotas, even humble Honda Accords had them. The Mazda Miata with its adorable pop-ups could literally wink at you. The Pontiac Firebird from Knight Rider made them iconic. The Ferrari F40 and Lamborghini Countach made them legendary. They existed because federal regulations required headlights at a certain height, and designers wanting low, aggressive front ends used the flip-up mechanism to comply while keeping the nose clean. But pedestrian safety regulations in the early 2000s, combined with cost and modern headlight technology, killed them off. The last car to carry them was the 2004 Chevrolet Corvette C5. They are not technically illegal, but regulations make them economically impossible for modern production. And that is a tragedy, because no modern LED strip will ever match the pure joy of watching a pair of headlights flip open and stare back at you. And there you have it, 25 car features that faded into history, and every one of them left a mark on how we think about driving. Which one do you miss the most, and which one did we forget? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. We would love to hear your stories. If you enjoyed this trip down automotive memory lane, hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you do not miss our next video. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.